Hello everyone, welcome back to the latest lecture session. In the last couple of sessions we have been discussing different water quality parameters, BOD, COD, total dissolved solids and so on and so forth. Then we discussed some emerging issues, emerging contaminants, right? And now we are going to move on to water and wastewater treatment. Again, we'll obviously just look at the overview so that you get an idea about how things work, so that once you become an entrepreneur or an administrator or let's say a concerned citizen, right, you will be able to make or take knowledgeable decisions, let's say, right. So let's move on. So let's see what we have out here. So we are going to start discussing water treatment first, maybe for a couple of classes, and then we are going to move on to wastewater treatment. Again, the generic aspects with an overview, let's see. And let's see what I have here. Okay, with respect to water treatment, I believe I have a graphic, so I would like to look at that first and then come back to where we are right now. So engineered water systems, there are two aspects obviously. One is engineered water systems, meaning you treat the water, right, you take the water from the different surface water bodies, right, water treatment plant. Sometimes depending upon the location vis-a-vis the availability of surface water bodies, you will also pump it up from groundwater, or we will pump up groundwater using deep municipal wells, let's say, right. And then depending on the treatment or the kind of treatment, you are going to have different kinds of water treatment plants and then supply to your particular homes, let's say, right. So wastewater treatment, obviously a different aspect which we are not going to look at right now, but we are going to look at this aspect in relatively greater detail. But again, with respect to what is this now, holistic picture, what is going to happen now. Sewage treatment plant, we constructed for domestic sewage from the homes, and also obviously industry releases consumable wastewater that is typically hard to degrade or biodegrade. And so you have different industrial wastewater treatment plants, typically common effluent treatment plants in India, and STP, sewage treatment plants for domestic wastewater, right. Again, after wastewater treatment, I guess, where does it go to? It again goes back to the surface water, which again, let's say if this is Delhi, goes down to Agra or Mathura, Agra, and so on and so forth, let's see, right. Again, you understand that it's more or less a cycle. That's what I wanted to mention. And let's move on out here, right. Again, we are just concerned with water treatment, let's see. And I believe I have one more graphic out here that's of relevance. Here we have again from the 2011 census. Here's the link here, where I got my data from, and we have the data for urban and rural, and obviously the total, I guess, right. On the y-axis, we have various drinking water sources. I am going to highlight tube well or borehole, just the hand pump, uncovered well, covered well, and tap water from untreated source, and tap water from treated source, right. So what do we see out here? We see that, let's say, with respect to tube well, urban certainly, mostly rural though, right. But with respect to fraction, total fraction, let's say, or total fraction, tube well, borehole, yes, considerable, but not the major source, let's see. But hand pump, and obviously again, why is this of great importance in rural areas? Because of the cost, let's see. The cost of hand pump is obviously pretty low, right. And obviously we have some in urban, but as you see again, with respect to a price sensitive nation, right, as India, we see that hand pumps, I guess, have or are most widely used in India, I guess 50% almost, or more than, not 50%, I guess, right. But again, the majority of the people, or the greater fraction of Indians, use hand pumps, let's say. Uncovered wells, again emphasis on usage in rural areas, and tap water from untreated source, keep in mind, from untreated source, again what is this, in rural areas, I guess, right. But with respect to tap water from treated source, obviously it is overwhelmingly the urban population, right. So again, we have the number of households here and such, right. So this is what you have, and again the total too. is almost as much as the one from the hand pump, let us say. So, what are the major sources out here of water? One is mostly treated, not treated, untreated water. You are pumping it up from the ground, that is what you have typically, right. And one is from what is this tap water from a treated source, I guess, right. So, again what do we have? We have tap water from treated source and typically groundwater or some surface water which is typically untreated. But what about those people in the urban areas, let us say, who get insufficient tap water from treated source or need access to, let us say, clean water even though they have no distribution network that supplies treated water? What do? Right. Again, these people, though, they can typically afford what do we say, money. So, we are going to talk about homemade, or not homemade, pardon me, home water purifiers, I guess, right. Obviously, we are talking about only a few but significant section of the Indian populace. So, we will talk about this a bit and then we will move on. So, when we talk about homemade, not homemade again, home water purifiers, what are we talking about? We are talking about, let us say, removing contaminants or different particles of concern from typically, where is it from? From groundwater, let us say. Typically groundwater is pumped up and people have RO units, or not RO, let me not call them RO units, homemade water, not homemade, water purifiers installed to treat this groundwater. Sometimes surface water bodies, untreated surface bodies, untreated surface water is also pumped and treated by these homemade home water purifiers, right, home water purifiers. Fine. So, let us understand what it is that we are trying to remove, especially if you are looking at groundwater, which is the case with quite a significant fraction of the Indian population. So, groundwater, as we mentioned, how is groundwater recharged? You have rainfall, it percolates through your aquifer, which itself acts as a filter, and you have a high permeable zone, let us say, right, beneath or above an impermeable zone typically, right, let us say in sand, and thus is pumped out groundwater, let us say, right. So, typically it is relatively pure because the runoff water or the rainwater has gone through a significant filter. But what are some of the issues? You can typically have, let us say, deposits out here that can lead to contamination. I think we talked about contamination in India at least by arsenic, fluoride, nitrate and so on and so forth. But again, this is not remarkably widespread, but there are hot spots obviously. But for most of the people, we are not really concerned about all these aspects, but we still buy a lot of home water purifiers. Why is that? Because people are not knowledgeable, let us say, right. We do not know what kind of water it is that is coming into our particular tap, and we do not know the extent of treatment, if any, that is required to be able to make it fit for consumption, let us say, right. So, again, let us just understand what it is that we have out here. In this case, I wanted to look at some of these home water purifiers, but I could not get a particular, what do we say, graphic or picture where I could see all the typical parts in detail. So, I looked it up on the internet, and there was a gentleman, an entrepreneur I guess, who built or his own homemade what do we say, RO purifier. Let us see, let us first understand the different parts out here. So, here you have the pre-treatment. So, this is nothing but just a filter. So, filter meaning I am not sure how many will understand this. Earlier anyway, what did we used to do? We just used to have a cloth and filter water using the cloth. What are we trying to do? We are trying to remove the particles which are greater in size when compared to the pore size of the relevant cloth, let us say, right. That is what we are here. Here again we have a filter here. So, the groundwater typically comes through, this is the inlet of water inlet, I guess you can see the arrow mark, right. So, water inlet, water comes in, and the purified water which permeates through this filter comes out. Filter cost typically 20 rupees, 30 rupees to change the filter, or at best 100 rupees, let us say, right. So, again you can build all this at home pretty easy and pretty cheap too. and then it goes through, let us say, again different solenoid valves, but we are not going to talk about all these aspects. And then we see that it goes to a carbon filter, then to a sediment filter, carbon meaning activated carbon, where you adsorb the organics, and then to a sediment filter, as in typically sand or such, sand filtration, and then to a pump. We will see why this is, or we pump. Why do we need the pump here? Because we have an RO unit here, reverse osmosis unit, which requires high pressures. Obviously, it is reverse osmosis, it is not just osmosis, it is reverse osmosis, that is why we have RO. So, you need to apply external pressure obviously, or high pressures, that is why you need this pump, and you are pumping the water in, and the treated water is coming through to the UV, ultraviolet what do we say, irradiation chamber. Why? We are trying to kill the, or inactivate rather, the bacteria or the pathogens, let us say. But here we see a bypass coming directly into this particular UV chamber. What is this about? Because if you take completely RO treated water, your body can't really make use of it well, because we need some nutrients too, right. Even though calcium, magnesium, let us say at significantly high concentrations, it is harmful to the, not harmful, let us say causes some digestive tract issues, we still need these nutrients, let us say. So, an just RO treated water with TDS around 10, 20 or so is not good for your health. So, typically the guy who comes to install it in your home will ask you what is the TDS that you want. Again, people pick up random numbers, we will see that. So, RO treated water, and the bypass from RO, the water which does not go through RO goes to the UV where the pathogens are killed, and here again they are having some alkaline, or for pH control, I guess, and then this is the treated water that is coming out. But the gentleman missed some aspects. Here you will typically have, let us say, an ultra, what do we say, filtration unit, because without that we will see what will happen. Typically you will have an ultra filtration unit. So, again most people will not build this, but the idea is to see that if you need costly, let us say 20,000 rupees worth RO unit in your home now. Again, assuming that you are in, let us say, Roorkee, where there are no contaminants of concern, at least in the groundwater, let us say, and known in general. Typically otherwise you can also look at it or get a sample test report for, I guess, 1000 rupees or 500 rupees, but the cost of your RO unit and the maintenance itself runs into 2,000 to 3,000 rupees per year. So, let us understand what you can do if you are in Roorkee, let us say. Obviously, if it is groundwater, it should be clear of suspended matter, but due to pumping and such issues, you will have, what do we say, particulate matter coming in. So, this pre-treatment or pre-filtration is always necessary, and you need to change this often. If not, I will show you what I had at my home. I opened it up to show you. This is the cartridge inside, or pre-filtration cartridge, if I may say so. And what do we see out here? So, I pressed it up, and you see the amount of dirt, and this is within, I believe, 4-month period, let us say. Okay, this is just groundwater from inside IIT Roorkee, which is pumped into the relevant, and you see the amount of what do we say, how shall I put it, muddy water out there, right, all the mud that I am able to wash off or just rinse off. So, you can rinse it regularly once a month, yes, and you see the change in color, let us say. You are having what do we say, desorption in some cases, or in some cases just abrasion, and I am washing the mud off. You can see the mud here clearly, obviously, or the muddy water, let us say. So, all the suspended matter that comes in along with the groundwater, this is the job of the cartridge is to remove such suspended matter, let us say, right. So, that is what we have, and now it is again fit for use, let us say, for 3-4 months. And we typically do not do this, that is why all our units choke, and bacteria develops on this filter, and so on and so forth. Again, as I mentioned, the cost is just 200 rupees to 100 rupees depending on the brand, obviously, right. So, again, that is one thing to keep in mind. And next, obviously, we are having carbon filter, sediment filter, RO, and so on and so forth. Let us see what we have. So, this is the relevant distribution with respect to size. What do we have out here? Size in microns, and different what do we say, contaminants or particles of concern. Highest range, what do we have? Sand. This is the pre-filtration cartridge job or pre-filters job. We are removing that, and as you see, it is considerable. And then along with it, obviously, we have bacteria, algae, and so on and so forth in the macro to micro range. Yes, you see that out here. But if you purchase the right type of filter, sometimes you can remove at least up till here, let us say. You can check the filter size, let us say the particle size that will be allowed to go through, and see which is the range of compound or particle that will pass through your filter, right. So, that is what we have out here. But as you see, here we are coming into the range of, with respect to viruses, they are pretty small, it is just RNA, and then if it is dissolved ions, let us say, it is in nanometer scale, let us say, right. So, how do I remove them, let us say. But before we think of and how do I remove them, obviously only reverse osmosis. But for reverse osmosis, as I mentioned, you need to have nano or ultrafiltration unit, otherwise your RO membrane will be choked pretty fast. That is why you need to have ultrafiltration unit. But the gentleman there, obviously he was only showing a kind of sand filter which will not help for protecting your RO membrane from choking up, because all this material that we have out here or in this range will go and be deposited on your RO membrane and choke it up, right. So, if you are just removing only the bigger particles, let us say till here with your sand filtration, which is what the person had out here, the entrepreneur again. The carbon filter for activated carbon is just for removing hydrophobic organic matter. So, where do we have that? So, you see some organics. So, it is not by size, but by change in phase. The hydrophobic organic matter will not want to stay in water. So, if you have activated carbon, it is going to absorb onto activated carbon, you are removing any organic content there. But typically in groundwater you would not expect any, but if there are any organic contaminants and such, they can be removed here. Again activated carbon, pretty cheap. And then sediment filter to remove those in this range, let us say sand filtration and such, and then ultrafiltration or microfiltration, and then we moved on to reverse osmosis, let us say. But as you see here, with respect to reverse osmosis, we are removing dissolved salts. We are removing dissolved salts as, or the metric that we looked at earlier to measure, that was total dissolved salts. And how can you measure it? You can measure it using a conductivity meter, right, conductivity meter. And what is the cost of a typical conductivity meter? Do I have that somewhere out here? And I guess it is 900. 2000 at best. Well, you do not need this laboratory scale, 500 and so on and so forth. So, again it is pretty cheap, let us see. So, before I go further, what I want to point out is, for your groundwater, what do you really need? You just need your pre-filtration system and maybe the carbon filter. And if you are really a guy or a lady who does not want to take any chance, you can also apply the UV, but typically groundwater pathogens and such, it should not be an issue. Even your distribution system will be relatively less, let us say. So, just this pre-filtration, which is 200 rupees, and your activated carbon, let us say 500 rupees, is good enough, and the water is fit to drink. You do not need the sediment filter, you do not need the ultrafiltration system, you do not and you do not need the pump for the RO membrane, you do not need the UV typically, or you can just have the UV with your carbon filter and this. So, total cost, let us say 1000 rupees, and you are done with that. But let us say if you open up any of these commercial what do we say, home water purifier websites, you will have a list of what do we say, systems. So, you are at a loss to choose which one, I guess, to choose, you are at a loss to choose, right, pardon me there. And again now though you can understand that at least if it is groundwater and if there are no arsenic deposits out there or such, you can just get your what is this pre-filtration cartridge with just the UV and the activated carbon, and you are fit for life. From time to time the UV has to be replaced because of every lamp will obviously have its life, and activated carbon will also have to be replaced depending on, let us say, how much organic content is there in your water. But typically in your groundwater you are not going to have high organic content. But TDS, why am I not really concerned about TDS, right? That is where I guess I digressed. Why am I not concerned about TDS? Why do not I need the RO system here, right? Why am I saying so? If you will remember this, and you can look it up too, the Bureau of Indian Standards Drinking Water Quality, what was the limit for TDS? Acceptable limit is 500 milligram per liter, right, 500. And typically in RO systems with the bypass, for example, RO, little to no TDS, 0 TDS comes out here, not 0, it is almost 0. And so that is why they bypass it and mix it here such that the mixture will be, let us say, 50 or 100 and so on and so forth, depending on what the poorly knowledgeable consumer asks the person to fit in, right. That is the amount of bypass that people are talking about. But again, the acceptable limit is 500, and if there are no contaminants of concern, you are very much good enough to go with respect to consuming 450 or even 400 milligrams per liter, no issue at all, right. It's also consuming water that has very low total dissolved solids, which are again essential to us. Let us say the body also needs some of these dissolved solids, let us say. That is harmful to us when you consume water that has very low TDS. So, keep that in mind the next time. Let us say either you act as an entrepreneur, or let us say you are now a relatively more knowledgeable person. What do you need with respect to groundwater? You need to remove the sand and such which comes out when you pump the groundwater, and you do not really need anything else. But if you are more concerned, you can have the activated carbon to remove the organic matter, and the UV to remove any pathogens which you think might have crept in the piping system or such, let us say. But typically for groundwater, we will not have pathogens and such, right. So, again, that is something that I wanted to share. So, again, as we saw, obviously here this is a source of bacteria. Obviously, if you do not clean it, because why I mention is one of my colleagues recently had a bout of diarrhea going about in his house, and the doctors were at a loss. But the issue was that they have not cleaned or changed, neither have they cleaned nor they changed this pre-treatment filter. They did not have a UV unit, and they were actually accumulating bacteria, or let us say promoting bacterial growth in this on this filter, and thus they had issues with respect to diarrhea. Again, that is enough of it. So, let us move on to discuss other aspects. So, with respect to water treatment, one is obviously home water purifiers of greater concern. Okay, now I guess I did want to speak about something else too. Pardon me for missing out on this. Here if you see, the water being pumped through at very high pressures is coming into the RO, and some of it is being bypassed, right. And what about this though? This is the treated water, but what is this out here? This is leaving the system, right. Even here it is leaving the system. What is this? This is the reject water, and that is the issue with RO, as in for reverse osmosis. While some of the water has very low TDS, all the other reject water has high TDS, and typically it can be as high as 50%. So, for 100 liters that you are consuming, let us say 100 liters will be lost. So, RO units typically not at all both economically friendly, nor are they environmentally friendly or sustainable. So, if someone tries to oversell RO units, just say, my dear sir, good day to you, right. So, that is one thing to keep in mind. I guess we will discuss this later, but I wanted to mention that in your home with respect to your home water purifiers, right. So, engineered water systems, we moved on from here. Okay, surface water, how do I treat that? And groundwater, how do I treat that? Hard groundwater, that is the key aspect. If it is just groundwater, you do not really need any treatment. As we saw, we just need some sedimentation or filtration, let us see. Surface water, let us just understand what these aspects are very quickly, because we are obviously not trying to take a civil engineering course here. So, screening to remove the bigger particles, people throw all kinds of plastic and so on, and then to see to it that the particles that can settle are relatively bigger. Those that can settle by themselves, they will settle. If the organic content is very high, then you will chlorinate initially, but the cost will increase here if you chlorinate initially too. And then those particles that can settle but will take too much time, what will you do? You will coagulate them, flocculate them, and then make them settle to the bottom, right. That is what we have out here. Particles that can settle by themselves by gravity, fine. Particles that can't settle by themselves within a reasonable period of time, what do we have? Coagulation and flocculation, followed by sedimentation. Then obviously filtration, right. Those that I guess cannot be removed by coagulation, flocculation and sedimentation, you are going to filter them out. Filter, again, what is the principle? Let us say the particle size has to be lesser than or greater than your filter size, if I may say so in a crude manner, let us say, right. And then adsorption, as we saw with respect to activated carbon or such, and then disinfection to remove any pathogens. With respect to hard groundwater, if it is being used for household purposes and not just for for consumption, right. What do we have? Aeration to bring the dissolved oxygen up, because the groundwater is somewhere out here. The atmospheric oxygen obviously can't reach equilibrium or be transferred into the groundwater. So, sometimes to bring up the DO, they will aerate it. If required, oxygenation or pre-chlorination, but for groundwater never or very rarely. For hardness, again lime soda treatment, and then you will precipitate it, and sedimentation, let us say recarbonation, let us say to bring down the pH, because here you are increasing the pH while trying to remove calcium and magnesium, which cause hardness. pH will increase. So, you are going to recarbonate, as in when you bubble carbon dioxide through water, you are going to have formation of H2CO3, and then pH will obviously come down, right. And then again filtration and then disinfection, right. So, let us see what else did I have. So, what am I trying to remove in surface water? Suspended matter, let us say, surface water, you have runoff, rainfall runoff going into your surface water streams or bodies. Let us say if you take a glass of water and see that, you will see that you have suspended matter. So, I want to remove this suspended matter, and so I guess low turbidity and high turbidity, right. And obviously, we discussed this earlier, I guess turbidity with respect to suspended matter when we are talking about water quality parameters. If there are pathogenic organisms, which will be the case in surface water bodies, we want to remove them. And also because, as we discussed this earlier with respect to, let us say Yamuna, those that have high organic content, they need to remove high levels of organic content too, right, depends on where you are obviously. And they are typically based on coagulating and flocculating them as in smaller particles. They are made to come together to form a bigger particle, now heavier, and then it settles down, right. So, that is what we have, settles down, sedimentation. So, filtration and disinfection, let us say. Filter, you are trying to remove smaller particles, disinfect, you are trying to kill pathogens, and that is it. Let us see what I have with respect to the schematic. So, what do we have? Screen to remove the bigger particles, coagulant, rapid mixing, right, you want to mix it well, and then slow mixing to allow formation of flocks or the bigger size particles. Flocks are formed here, and then the flocks are allowed to settle in this sedimentation tank, and then this water goes through a rapid sand filter, let us say, where the particle that needs to be removed will be captured, let us say, right, or will be filtered out, and then disinfection and to your distribution system, right. That is pretty straightforward out here. And again coagulation, flocculation, some more data, but we will skip through most of the stuff, because I believe I already discussed this earlier. So, coagulation meaning you want to reduce the charge such that flocculation can occur, meaning contact of particles can occur. For example, I have these particles which are too small to settle by themselves, but they will not come together. Why is this? Because they are relatively unstable, they have a negative charge, net negative charge on the surface. So, they repel each other, right. So, when we say coagulate, we are adding a coagulant, right, which will, what do we say, negate this particular charge such that the particles can come together and form flocks, right. Once they form bigger flocks, heavier, and then they can be removed by sedimentation. That is the relevant principle out here. So, here we have what do we say, a schematic. In the left chamber here we have coagulation, rapid mixing of your coagulant, where you add a coagulant and it is rapidly mixed, and here you have slow mixing, where the flocks are obviously going to be formed. If you mix it fast, obviously the flocks are going to, I guess, shear, right. So, you do not want that. So, slow mixing here and gentle mixing or rapid mixing here in the case of flocculation, rapid mixing in the case of coagulation, gentle mixing in the case of flocculation, right. Again, we discuss most of these aspects, so I am not going to repeat these aspects. I believe I already drew this figure, but colloidal particles, you have pretty small particles, but now after I neutralize the surface charge by adding a coagulant, right. Obviously, now I have particles of much bigger size, let us say 1 to 100 micrometers compared to 10 power minus 3 to 1 micrometer, and now this can be removed by sedimentation, let us say, that will come down by gravity. What kind of coagulant do I need to add? One that is non-toxic and inexpensive, right, and again in pH range It should be relatively insoluble. Why? Because whatever you add should not become more toxic, that is one of the reasons. So, what are some of the typical coagulants? And obviously high charge density, because otherwise you will have to add a lot of it. For example, here we have the dose of coagulant. If it is Na plus giving just one charge, let us say, or has just one plus one charge, calcium plus 2, Al 3 plus. As you see, the dose required at least in milligrams per liter, what do we say, decreases with respect to the charge, right. Obviously, if you are adding just plus 1, you need to add a lot of the relevant coagulant here. Typical ones that are used, alum, again Al 3 plus here, ferric chloride Fe3 plus, and sometimes Fe2 plus, but not usually though, I guess, right. So, and then polyelectrolyte. So, electric potential, let us say, if there is no salt added, this is what we have, low and high salt, right, distance from surface of the particle. So, as you add salt, obviously the electric potential is decreasing, let us say. Again you have distance from surface of the particle, let us say, right. So, even for the particles to come together, you want to decrease this potential, fine. Again with respect to effect of what do we say, valence or charge, plus 1 charge, plus 2, plus 3. So, the higher the better, I guess, right. So, that is what we have out here. And then rapid mixing, again typical time only 10 to 30 seconds. And then flocculation, typical time 20 minutes at least, gentle mixing. And then sedimentation, you want them to settle. So, here the time is around 3 hours, right, and then you filter the water out to remove any other what do we say, smaller particles that can't be removed by sedimentation. So, as I see, conventional filtration, what are we able to remove? Algae, cysts, quite a few bacteria, silt and sand, right, that is what we have. But with coagulation and flocculation, what are you removing again? You are removing most of the viruses, natural organic matter, humic acid, bacteria, right. So, as you see with coagulation and flocculation itself, you will remove most of the relevant aspects of concern, let us say, right. That is why we do not really go for RO or such in your surface water treatment plants anyway, usually anyway. So, removal mechanism, straining, I guess, the particle size is greater than the void space. Biological mechanism where microorganisms develop and degrade the relevant impurity, or it can be adsorbed onto the filter or sediment on the filter, right. Again without getting too technical, general aspect, you have sand, gravel, water comes in or filters through and is removed, treated water comes out, fine, that is what we have out here, pretty simple. And disinfection, as we discussed earlier, it has huge and immediate impact. I believe we already looked at this. So, what is the graphic here that we have? I believe this is from US, yes, Philadelphia. Typhoid cases per 1 lakh, population 1890 to 1935. Again, as you see, number of typhoid cases going up and down and such with year and such. But once people found out about chlorination, disinfection, you see that it is pretty much cut down. And once people understood carriers or bacteria and such, obviously again people took greater measures, and now you see that with more knowledgeable application of the relevant techniques, the relevant typhoid or relevant diseases have decreased, let us say, right. So, I guess I am out of time. So, I will end this session for today, and I believe for now, and in the next session we will wrap up water treatment and move on to wastewater treatment, right. So, I guess thanking you for your patience, good day.